Frank Lloyd Wright. How one man redefined home for an entire nation. Deep inside every American, there's a house, not one made of wood, steel, or glass, but one built from memories. Backyard summers, front porch conversations, the scent of old trees after rain. It's more a feeling than a structure, part comfort, part nostalgia. For a boy born in 1867 in Richland Center, Wisconsin, that feeling wasn't just a passing thought. It became the compass of his entire life before he became one of the most iconic names in American architecture. Frank Lloyd Wright was just a curious kid surrounded by rolling farmland, quiet hills, and a sky that seemed to go on forever. His days were shaped by nature, not noise. There were no towering buildings, no street grids, no architectural landmarks, just wind in the grass, shifting light, and the deep silence of the Midwest. But even in that silence, something inside him stirred a question. Maybe, what if space could speak? What if buildings could breathe? Wright didn't chase fame. He didn't follow the footsteps of past masters. He broke the trail himself with vision, grit, and a refusal to settle for anything ordinary. While other boys played with toys, he built imaginary cities. His mother, Anna, believed he was destined to be a builder. She hung geometric prints in his nursery and filled his world with design before he even knew what that word meant. By his 20s, Wright wasn't just sketching ideas, he was living them. He designed his first home in Oak Park, Illinois, laying the foundation for a philosophy that would forever change how we think about living space, open plans, natural light, harmony between home and landscape. These weren't trends to him, they were truths. So what happens when a mind molded by the rhythms of land and light dares to reimagine how people live within walls? What kind of architecture is born when defiance meets design? Wright's buildings didn't just sit on the land, they became part of it. He didn't simply draw up blueprints. He told stories through space, stories of freedom, of rootedness, of possibility. And it all started with a boy from Wisconsin who believed homes could do more than shelter, they could speak to the soul. This is the beginning of Frank Lloyd Wright's journey, but it's far from the end. If you're drawn to stories of vision, rebellion, and the relentless pursuit of beauty, you're in the right place, because this isn't just about architecture. It's about a man who didn't just build structures, he redefined the space between dream and reality. Feel that pull? Hit subscribe, stick with us. We've got more stories to tell, and they're not just meant to be read, they're meant to be felt. By the early 20th century, American architecture seemed stuck in Europe's shadow-chasing neoclassical columns. Elaborate ornamentation and an old-world sense of grandeur. Buildings echoed the past, not the present. But Frank Lloyd Wright saw a different future. He turned away from tradition and looked toward the horizon, quite literally. As he stood before the endless, open stretches of the American Midwest, he asked a radical question. What if a home could feel like it grew from the land, not just sat on top of it? That question sparked a revolution. It didn't start in an academic hall or a design studio, but right in the heart of Illinois' flat, windswept landscape. This was the birthplace of the Prairie Style. Wright's answer to the rigid, compartmentalized homes of the past. Instead of stacked boxes and stuffy rooms, he envisioned spaces that breathed, that flowed, that felt inherently American. Wright designed homes with long, low-pitched roofs that seemed to stretch out and touch the land. Wide eaves extended like arms, welcoming and protective. The interiors were open and connected, designed to mirror the boundless feel of the prairie itself. He rejected the traditional idea of a house as a series of separate rooms. To him, a home should feel like one continuous space, a living organism, rather than a set of walls. At the heart of this new vision was the hearth. For Wright, the fireplace wasn't just a structural centerpiece, it was the emotional core of the home. Life revolved around it, much like a family might gather around a campfire under the stars. Everything from built-in furniture to custom arc glass windows to open floor plans served one purpose: unity. It works like the Willits house and the Roby house. Wright wasn't just building homes, he was building a philosophy. These houses didn't shout wealth or status. They whispered something more profound. This is who I am. His designs reflected individuality, harmony with nature, and a belief that architecture should enhance daily life, not just decorate it. There was something quietly rebellious in Wright's approach. It pushed back against imported styles and instead celebrated the openness and freedom of the American spirit. In many ways, the Prairie Style captured the essence of a young, evolving country, restless, independent, and hungry for something new. For those who first stepped into a Wright home, The experience was transformative. The sense of connection to the space, to the land, and even to oneself was unlike anything they had felt before. Wright wasn't just reshaping architecture. He was reshaping the very idea of home, and once you experienced it, you couldn't go back. Frank Lloyd Wright wasn't just an architect, he was a listener, not to clients necessarily, or even to critics, but to the land itself. He believed that nature had something to say, and that the role of the architect wasn't to drown it out with steel and concrete, but to hear it, interpret it, and respond with humility and vision. For Wright, the landscape wasn't a blank canvas or a hurdle to overcome. It was a partner in the creative process, and that belief gave rise to one of the most influential design philosophies of the 20th century, organic architecture. At its core, Wright's philosophy sounds almost childlike in its clarity. Buildings should grow from the earth, not be forced upon it. But that simplicity is deceptive. To truly create architecture that feels native to its environment requires more than clever design. It demands observation, patience, and a willingness to let go of control. Wright didn't just design around trees, rivers, and stones. He designed with them. He let the lay of the land shape floor plans. He studied how light moved across a hillside. He paid attention to how wind funneled through valleys. For him, the land wasn't a stage. It was a co-author. One of the purest expressions of this idea is Fallingwater, completed in 1937 in rural Pennsylvania. It's not just a house built near a waterfall, it's a house that becomes part of the waterfall. The home's terraces jut out like stone ledges, mimicking the rocky outcrops around them. The sound of rushing water isn't a background noise. It's a living part of the space, echoing through every room. Even the materials are deeply tied to place. The floors match the color and texture of the boulders below. Fallingwater doesn't sit on the landscape, it inhabits it. Wright's organic architecture didn't simply alter the way buildings looked, it transformed how they were experienced. He made architecture emotional. You don't just see a Wright space, you feel it. Walls became more than boundaries, they became moments, stories, invitations. A window wasn't a place for a view, but for a conversation with the sun. In Wright's hands, space became something you could connect with viscerally and personally. At a time when much of modern architecture was chasing the cold beauty of glass towers and industrial symmetry, Wright dared to go in the opposite direction. He stripped things back. He reached for the raw, the real, the rooted, and in doing so, he offered a timeless reminder. The most enduring architecture doesn't impose itself on the world. It listens to it, it learns from it, and in that act of listening, it becomes something more than structure. It becomes spirit. During the Great Depression, when hope felt like a luxury and most Americans were simply trying to survive, Frank Lloyd Wright was dreaming again, not for himself, but for them. He looked around and saw that beauty had become a privilege, something reserved for the wealthy, the elite, the rare, and he believed that was wrong. He believed that every American family, no matter their income, deserved to live in a space that lifted their spirit and reflected their dignity. That dream became Usonian. Usonian homes weren't just affordable alternatives, they were radical in both design and purpose. Wright stripped away the unnecessary. No basements, no attics, no ornament for ornament's sake. What remained was essence, flat roofs, open floor plans, radiant heating, and an intimate relationship between house and landscape. In these homes, function met poetry, and nothing was wasted, not space, not material, not meaning. The first of these homes, built for Herbert Jacobs in Madison, Wisconsin in 1937, cost less than $6. Yet its value couldn't be measured in dollars. It offered light where darkness had crept in. It offered air, openness, and flow in a time of stagnation. It offered something bold, the idea that design didn't have to be grand to be great. Wright wasn't handing people charity. He was handing them power, the power to live thoughtfully, modestly, beautifully, to dwell in homes that didn't just shelter, but inspired. The Usonian vision was about more than houses. It was about respect for the land, for the craft, for the people living inside. And giving ordinary Americans extraordinary design. Wright did something few have achieved. He made architecture not just a statement, but a gift, and in doing so, he reminded a struggling nation that beauty wasn't a luxury, it was a right. There are turning points in life that leave a permanent mark, moments that don't just change you, but completely break you open. For Frank Lloyd Wright, that moment came in the summer of 1914. Taliesin, His cherished retreat nestled in the serene hills of Spring Green, Wisconsin, was not just a home, it was a sanctuary, a vision brought to life. But in one horrific afternoon, that vision was reduced to ash and tragedy. A servant, in a shocking act of violence, set fire to the house and brutally murdered 7 people, including Wright's partner, Mama Borthwick, and her 2 young children. The flames didn't just consume the structure, they tore through Wright's world. But it's what he did afterward that would not only shape his career, it would redefine the man himself. Wright chose to rebuild, not as an escape from grief, but as a deep act of reverence. For him, Taliesin was never just a building, it was a living idea, an extension of his philosophy, his heart, and his unshakable belief that architecture and life are inseparable. As he lifted each beam and placed each stone, he wasn't just reconstructing walls, he was rebuilding a sense of purpose. He believed that materials held meaning, that light could heal, that spaces could be reborn, just like people. That belief in rebirth followed him across the country to the Arizona desert. In 1937, Wright began creating Taliesin West, his winter home and a new kind of studio outside Scottsdale. But it wasn't simply another building, it was an experiment, a laboratory, a way of life. He and his apprentices used the land itself as their blueprint. They built with desert rocks, draped canvas roofs to filter the sun, and drew natural light from the open sky. Everything was hands-on. The students didn't just study architecture, they lived it. They cooked, cleaned, and constructed together, forming a community where learning was lived, not lectured. Taliesin West wasn't just a response to a different climate, it was a continuation of Wright's belief in transformation, that from barrenness, beauty could rise, that from ruin, something meaningful could grow. Through these two homes, Taliesin in Wisconsin and Taliesin West in Arizona, Wright offered more than buildings. He gave us a philosophy rooted in resilience. He showed that creativity could be an answer to heartbreak, that design could be an act of healing, and that when the unthinkable happens, one can still pick up the pieces, not to return to what was, but to create what could be. In the end, Frank Lloyd Wright didn't just teach us how to build, he taught us how to begin again. In the last chapters of his life, Frank Lloyd Wright didn't quiet down, he soared to new creative heights. When most men might settle into retirement or look back on their accomplishments, Wright remained restless, still sketching designs and stretching the limits of architecture well into his 80s. And during that late period, he gifted the world with one of the boldest buildings ever conceived, the Solomon or Guggenheim Museum in New York City. This building was nothing like what Manhattan had ever seen. Wright's spiral museum turned conventional gallery space on its head. Rather than walking from room to room, visitors would glide up a continuous ramp around the building's core and experience more like drifting through a living form of art. Earlier critics at the time called the design strange, even arrogant. Yet Wright understood something essential. He wasn't simply designing a vessel for art. He was creating a work of art in itself. That Guggenheim wasn't a departure, it was the culmination of a lifetime's vision. Even in his final decades, Wright continued to conceive audacious projects. The Marin County Civic Center in California rose as a soaring expression of civic pride and confidence. He remained invested in shaping ambitious concepts like Broadacre City, which imagined decentralized, community-based living long before suburban sprawl redefined the American landscape. Wright's late-life projects were never sentimental pastiches, they were bold, forward-thinking, and relentlessly optimistic. By the time he passed away in 1959 at the age of 92, Wright had completed over 380 built works and produced more than 1,000 design drawings. His influence was global in scope, from receiving the American Institute of Architects Gold Medal to earning the Royal Institute of British Architects Gold Medal. He continued to be celebrated long after his death. In 2019, a collection of his buildings was inscribed as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, considered masterpieces of modern architecture. These honors affirmed what he intuitively knew. He didn't just make buildings, he transformed the way people conceive architecture. Throughout his career, and especially in his final decades, Wright refused to be defined by critics or constrained by convention. He outlasted doubters and outdreamed them. While the architecture world chased fashions and fleeting trends, Wright's work aimed at something more enduring, elegance rooted in nature, harmony drawn from light and space, and buildings meant to last generations. What defines Frank Lloyd Wright's legacy isn't the square footage he designed, it's the courage he embodied. He imagined buildings as living, breathing environments. He crafted structures that reached beyond practicality to touch poetry. He remained dedicated to his vision from early talent to his final sketch, and he pushed until his last breath died in his twilight years. Rather than seeking comfort or looking back, Wright remained audacious, curious, and creative. He gave us structures that don't just contain art, they are art, and in doing so, he rewrote what architecture could be. That legacy, his refusal to settle, his willingness to dream deeply and build boldly, is ultimately what he left behind. Frank Lloyd Wright didn't just design buildings, he designed beliefs. To him, architecture was never just about bricks, wood, or steel. It was about shaping the way we live, the way we feel, and how we connect to the world around us. He believed that space could stir the soul, that beauty wasn't optional, it was essential. Wright didn't see homes as boxes to shelter us, but as living, breathing environments that could inspire, calm, and awaken us down from the long, low lines of his prairie houses that seemed to hug the land, to the bold spiral of the Guggenheim Museum that challenged every rule. Wright's work always asked a deeper question: what does it mean to truly live well? Not just comfortably, but meaningfully. Not just within four walls, but in harmony with nature, with light, with purpose. His journey wasn't easy. Taliesin, his cherished home and studio, was destroyed by fire more than once, yet each time he rebuilt not just the structure, but the spirit. And when the world called for speed and profit, he turned to simplicity and soul. His Usonian homes weren't grand palaces, but elegant, affordable spaces meant to bring beauty to everyday Americans. That was his quiet revolution. Dignity through design. Wright didn't seek applause. He walked away from safety, from trends, even from approval. If it meant staying true to what he believed, that kind of integrity, it's rare and powerful. He proved that architecture isn't just about what you build, it's about why you build it. His legacy isn't just measured in the stunning homes or iconic museums. It's in the courage to question, the bravery to imagine differently, and the commitment to create with meaning. Wright's work whispers this truth to us: you don't have to be loud to make a lasting impact. Power can be found in a beam of sunlight, across a wooden floor, in the silence of a room that feels like home. So what does that mean for us? Maybe you're starting a new project, chasing a dream, raising a family, or simply searching for something real in a noisy world. Frank Lloyd Wright's story is a reminder: you don't need permission to begin. All you need is purpose, patience, and the guts to be honest with yourself. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What part of Wright's journey hit home for you? Was it his resilience after loss, his vision that defied norms, his refusal to compromise even when it cost him? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective matters. And if this story stirred something in you, something you can't quite name, but don't want to let go, subscribe. Help us keep telling stories that go deeper than design. Stories that breathe, that resonate, that build something lasting in all of us.